Yeah, I mean, in existing companies to talk about AI first is probably very difficult. It's probably a good mantra and ambition to have, but of course, you're battling a lot of old systems, a lot of old mindsets, traditional mindset. That's going to take time.
Welcome to another episode of the Chris Rod Max Show. We are the AI's Buyer Briefing. Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited to be here on the show again today and talk about the controversy of the US and China battle in AI.
So let's get started then. So there are so many topics to discuss, and as usual, not enough time. So let's do that. But before we get started, for the audience, remember to like, subscribe, and join our newsletter on the chrisrodmax.com. There you can get all the latest updates, our recordings, episodes, everything. So we have three topics that we want to discuss. The first one is on new releases that have happened last week from OpenAI and from Mistral. We have a Mistral model called Mistral Small 3. It is quite performant, while at the same time being, as its name says, so small and tailored for enterprise use cases, meaning fraud detection, healthcare, robotics, and so on. And we also have two from OpenAI. One is more a feature rather than exactly a model, and the one is a model. So we have the O3 Mini. O3 Mini is, so this set of models are more focused on reasoning rather than actual question and answering, as we had, for example, with the recent DeepSeek R1. And then we have a deep research feature, which if you have seen Gemini and Google models, they have this functionality where they allow that do let's say like a researcher's work. Say, I want to prepare myself for an interview and I want to speak about this topic, and then it will browse the internet and prepare here a summary, briefing for you. Chris, have you tried these models? Have you used them? Have you seen them already?
Honestly speaking, I feel like it's kind of like with the iPhone or rather iPad releases. There are so many very similar models. They all sound very similar. And I think to the end user, it is actually quite hard to distinguish. I think right now, when we look at some of the performances, it's really for the engineers and for the hardcore tech lovers that actually do compare and try to squeeze out an ounce of performance. But I think to the general user, I don't think that it's very necessary, very visible, also because I don't think we necessarily go very deeply in prompting or questioning. However, I have to say, what I find very interesting about this development is obviously this whole announcement around DeepSeek, the nervousness of the market. I mean, we saw the stock markets drop after DeepSeek came out. And now what we see is sort of this race of specialization, right? Because we start with these big models. The whole goal was about stuffing those models with lots and lots and lots of data. But actually, China has chosen a very different path. And we reported on that before, where it was around specialization, really building niche models trained on specialized data for special sectors. And I do think that this is really the trend that we see right now.
When you go and look at such ChatGPT, when you go and start working with Claude, there is always this tab where you can switch models. Do you switch them? Have you tried them? Do you use the standard one? How do you work with them?
Honestly speaking, I don't, because again, I can't really distinguish the names at this point anymore. O3 Mini, then there's like OpenAI Mini, and these different names I think are already quite arbitrary. But I think for the general use case, I don't think I really care, right? Like whether it's to smoothen an email or to summarize some information. I think for that, any of the models can perform at a decent level. That is enough, at least for me. How about yourself?
I do switch from time to time. However, I must say that indeed, in I compared to all the options that you're saying. So now it's like so confusing. The names are cryptic and so on. So unless I actually think I want to address this problem and potentially this might be a better model. But the other thing is also that there is not, let's say, like a table where I say, if I have this problem, then I should use this model. But it's more about potentially this model might work. So I'll try it. But however, I might need to go back to another one and so on. So I agree with you. The market is confusing, and potentially it is a little bit where the market is separated between, let's say, like Western AI and Chinese AI, and everything falls under a bucket.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to add to your point, we had that conversation last week, right? Where actually it's not necessarily really the differentiator is not necessarily the foundational model, is rather who actually owns the interface to the customer or to the end user, and how well is it integrated into their current workflow. Because we know, I mean, humans are super lazy, they don't want to change their behavior. So ideally, if you can plug in somehow, that's going to win the race, not necessarily whether this one model will perform 1% better than the other one.
Definitely. And with that, we can basically cover like the big discussion that we have with so China, Chinese models, and where will they be used, where not. Where we've been hearing, and well, basically Palantir has been around for quite some time. For those who do not know, Palantir is this, it started as like that company, more or less say a bit of consultancy, bespoke data pipelines and so on for the government, for enterprise clients. And now more and more in the last couple of years have transformed itself in a AI company, an AI for the enterprise, for the government. And its CEO, Alex Karp, is quite controversial. Often he has some statements that make some headlines. He also has some sound bites that are juicy. And the latest one was where he was basically saying that he doesn't see adoption of so DeepSeek R1, this Chinese model that has been making the headlines in the Western world. So he basically so said that on one side we have the CDs as an AI arms race, so where the West is competing against China. And also his CRO was saying that he strongly discourages any customer in the US to use it. And he doesn't even believe that the government will be using it. So, Chris, what do you make of those statements? So, do you think that governments should avoid altogether? Do you think that we are here in this war, a geopolitical conflict? What's happening?
Honestly speaking, don't you think that this is almost like a digital war at this point in time? And it started out in 2010 when China blocked some of these Western companies such as Facebook and Google, and now it's sort of like developed into this arms race in AI, where of course, like the US is limiting quite a bit of the hardware supply to China, but again, I think it also shows that China has been quite innovative and creative to like work around it. And I mean, there are some, smart entrepreneurs in China that were told, okay, listen, you have to make do with whatever hardware you have and go figure and make it happen. And I think we need to distinguish between two things here, right? So I think on the one hand, we see this nervousness, this tension, this, oh my God, like we need to like really double down now in the US to come up with these specialized, more less costly models that can actually perform quite better than generic models, let's say. So I think for that, this is a good thing. So it's almost like this competition is healthy to like really create the next innovation, and also maybe even propels this AI sector even further than what we've actually encountered over the last 1 or 2 years already. On the other hand, I think to your point and to Palantir's recommendation not to use DeepSeek for any Western usage, let's say by governments, I think that is actually, in my opinion, a very different type of conversation. It's really around the geopolitics behind it, and I mean, it would be to say, well, you shouldn't be using any Chinese products in the West or vice versa. And I'm not sure. I mean, of course, there's always a risk that someone will listen to your conversations, and it's even the US probably listens to our conversation here right now. I don't know. Rod, what's your take on this?
Yes, I gotta say that you're right that likely there was this before and after moment back in 2010. I mean, it's almost an ancient history, so 15 years ago, where really China became quite restrictive, started to become more and more restrictive in which services are allowed in the mainline, which providers can do any type of like transactions, how easy it is for people to browse on the broader internet and so on. And this has been used as a little bit of an argument from Western sources saying, okay, because we have this restrictive access, our companies, Google and so on, they cannot penetrate this market. Why we should treat them the same way, or why should we be any different? And then also we have a situation that either these rumors or reality or just to be on the safe side, but we have already a situation where Australia and also Taiwan, they have said for their governmental agencies, they are forbidding the usage of DeepSeek R1. In Italy, so it was decided that it will not be allowed in the country, primarily because of like user data and privacy reasons and so on, but likely also they'll not be in conflict with the US administration. So what we can potentially see is that even if this not happen, if you're saying maybe there is no data extraction, maybe there's no surveillance whatsoever, still governments will try to be on the safer side of maybe not angering the US administration, maybe also trying to address some security concerns that their own political leaders might have, and therefore say, okay, better we don't use it at all.
I mean, this is why I say this is feeling a lot like a digital modern war, in the sense that there's so much mistrust here, right? I mean, I frankly don't know if there's surveillance risk, yes or no, but I think everyone's very cautious and really trying to like avoid any type of data leak or hacking, opportunity. And at the same time, I think there were some memes going around in the internet actually, on trying DeepSeek, and I think someone asked whether Taiwan is part of China or is independent, and I think DeepSeek said a very typical Chinese answer, and I think that was sort of like a reason for people to believe, okay, this is like a biased, model, and therefore not very safe. And I think again, not to make a political statement here, but I do believe that again it shows how people look at the world from different perspectives, and it's not necessary that something is true or not true, but it's more like what's the cultural background and the context of it. And I think everyone is free to choose which model they want to use for having their information summarized or do some of this thing. But yeah, I do think second order consequences. There's so much, yeah, there's so much mistrust in general, and this is just a symptom of a bigger problem that we see.
Yes. And I also find quite fascinating how we hold the different models and different AIs as different standards. So here, the point on user asking DeepSeek R1, what about this historic event in China? What about, so who is the president? Is it a dictator? This, that, and so on. And then saying, look, the answer that I'm getting is not what I expect it to be, so the model is wrong. But also, so if you try, for example, to go now, OpenAI for its image generator model and say, give me an image of Donald Trump. It doesn't let you. It tells, I cannot give a generate images. Yes. When you say, give me an image of someone who is slightly similar to Donald Trump, but not Donald Trump, it will say, no, I cannot provide these images. OpenAI, the image generator, doesn't let you, for example, do anything related to known personalities, anything that it can be trademark related. For example, you say, give me a cartoon from the 90s similar to Mickey Mouse. Alone the fact that you're mentioning Mickey Mouse will completely block it and do not let you generate that. And in a sense, this is so just like a generation, so restriction, similar to you asking what happened in China this year, will be the equivalent. He doesn't want to give you an answer, but we never say, hey, this is wrong. Hey, why is this happening?
Yeah, exactly. It's also censored in a way, right? I mean, maybe for different intentions, right? Like more for data privacy and personal data privacy. But yeah, you're right. I mean, again, it's very similar type of restrictions and limitations we see, and we just don't hear about it from that perspective of censorship.
Yes. And at the same time, it's also like big business. As soon as Palantir announced these recent market performance stock updates, so they made their quarterly report, their stock so basically rose by 24%. So we do see that definitely there will be a market for saying, hey, we want to stay like here, bulletproof, protected, governmental approved AI. And here, of course, Palantir is a good address for that. And this is starting to be reflected on the stock market. And talking about large organizations, adoption and so on, another big development is happening across the US is so with Elon Musk and his role in the U.S. administration, where he has this Doge agency, supposedly it's about finding synergies and reducing cost, any type of waste and so on. And he's starting to push, and not only him, but his associates are starting to push this idea of starting an AI first strategy for departmental organizations, for large organizations, for governmental agencies. And my question for you, Chris, is do you think that organizations will become AI first? Do you think that when they see, hey, here comes Elon and then he's tackling bureaucracy, getting rid of waste and introducing AIs here and there, we have to do the same?
Yeah, I mean, in existing companies to talk about AI first is probably very difficult. It's probably a good mantra and ambition to have, but of course you're battling a lot of old systems, a lot of old mindsets, traditional mindset. That's going to take time. I think in general, I have to say, I do think that it's a good time to just, maybe try to like shift things a bit more radical, perhaps. And I think, having business people be in politics might be one way to like really try to like increase the efficiency. And I think that's the whole point of, I guess, Elon Musk and Doge coming in and really trying to like look from the outside, if you will, on the red tape, on the processes that, frankly speaking, if you've been in a space for too long, you can't even like, you don't even question these processes and ways of working anymore. And I do think that this is a good thing. On AI first strategy, I think this is very vague in my opinion, and it's very unclear, at least to me, what this essentially entails, how things are going to change. And I think all in all, I believe we're really at this like, yeah, let's say watershed moment, yeah, where it's good. I think that the governments are all very attuned to AI and also the potential of AI for the world, and that they're starting to like dabbling in with it, having interest in it, and I think ethically try to build a position for their respective countries on how to deal with AI.
You're based in Singapore. What's the perspective over there? Because the government in Singapore is famous for trying to run its organization, its structures as a company. So performance oriented, so lean structures, trying to be as detailed as possible. Now with this wave of AI first, let's try to run organizations, government as a startup. How's it been seen over there?
I think Singapore does quite a bit actually, and Singapore has always been a very forward-looking, very innovative country to adopt innovation fast. And I think one major topic is, of course, to develop AI talents. So there's a huge push towards education to really upskill people to make them understand and use AI and also code AI. But I think we're really talking about not necessarily the foundational layers. I do believe that there are some research projects around foundational layers, but it's really about application. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of interest actually, and a lot of people trying to understand how to actually utilize it in their companies and their respective processes. But of course, I mean, there's obviously a reliance on some of these bigger, players that are already very entrenched in the B2B space, such as Microsoft, Copilot, etc., to do that. So I think this is what we see here in Asia, and obviously now with DeepSeek, there's obviously a lot of interest also to using it here and to like understand how to like employ that, even because obviously China is a bit closer to Southeast Asia.
Yes. And to your point, 22% of the revenue from NVIDIA comes from Singapore. So there is all the discussion of it's actually just Singapore a gateway for China, so that where we were discussing in previous weeks, China is getting restricted access, the technologies, models, hardware. So potentially they just go and open an office in Singapore and then they place all this technology there. They're claiming, oh, we're a Singaporean company, but in fact, they are doing development for the mainland.
But I find it very interesting. Have you heard anything about India and some foundational models? I mean, we talk about so many good and smart and brilliant Indian engineers. It's very surprising to me that I at least haven't heard of any foundational model coming out of India.
I'm not sure if there is like a dedicated development in itself. What I do see, especially also when I speak with engineers and so on, is how there is engineers that are originally from India. how there is a large boom where they say, hey, I just want to be, let's say, in the West for a few years, maybe for career perspectives, get maybe some accolades, some logos here and there. But as soon as possible, I want to return back home because there's so much opportunity there. There is so much growth that I see my future rather there than here, which will be very surprising because one will say, hey, actually, no, it's much better here than there and so on. But it's not being perceived by them like that. So potentially it's not really happening at here, the foundational layer models and so on, but more on the applications. So where there is so a large boom on IT services, digital services, and so on in India. But on top, the whole startup scene, there are so many large companies that one would never know that they're actually originated from India, their headquarters are in India, and so on. And there is this huge ecosystem, not only in specific cities, but across the whole country, that is potentially just a matter of time for India to start doing more and more, and maybe potentially similar to China with localization of saying, hey, OpenAI, you want to target the Indian market, then open an office here and do some development here with our own scientists. So yeah, so definitely. So here, three block of developments. On one side, more and more models coming, as we are noticing it becoming a bit so a jungle of names, very cryptic, hard to differentiate for what they're for, when they use them and when not. Then also we're having the situation of Palantir position itself as, let's say, like this government safe AI, plus making strong statements on discouraging their customers as well as agencies that use anything related or is coming from China. And then also the discussion of, now that we're seeing many changes in the US government, will that trickle down and have an impact not only on large companies, but maybe also other governments that say, hey, we want to be like a startup, we want to be like an AI first organization. So we covered this for this week. Remember, tune in next week for another episode of the Chris Rodmack Show. Join us on chrisrodmax.com. Until next time.